MOTO2N, the mobile repair service for Japanese motorcycles and all kinds of scooters on Colorado's Front Range. So I'm just on my way home right now from working on 2 Honda Shadows. I usually shoot these videos on my way out to the job, but this time I decided we're going to try it backwards. I'm going to shoot the intro video after having worked on the bikes. So the first bike was a blue Honda Shadow, VT750. Mid-2000s, something like that. Blue bike. The other bike was silver. All it needed was an oil change, so we're not even really going to get into that. But the blue bike needed its carburetors cleaned. I rebuilt the carburetors about 2 years ago, so it has fresh needles and seats, and then 2-year-old float bowl gaskets in there too. So the float bowl gaskets were in pretty good shape. The needles and seats were in great shape. The pilot jets were plugged. So because it had only been sitting for about a year, all I really did was I did a quick just bench clean. I cleaned them right there on the ground in front of the bike. I just cleaned out the pilot jets, blew out all the holes with carburetor cleaner, blew out the pilot jets and all the holes on the carburetors with compressed air. And then after that I reassembled all of it and it fired right up and ran. So you'll get to see and watch all of that starting right now. At this point, I've already figured out that this bike only runs on its choke, which means its carburetors need to be cleaned. At the very least, the pilot jets are plugged up. I also know that I rebuilt these carburetors within the past couple of years. I think it was about 2 years ago. The customer reported that the bike has been sitting for about a year and will only run on its choke. My plan is to remove the carburetors and clean them on the ground in one of my blue bins. I think all that needs to happen is to clean the pilot jets out. That's generally the first thing to go as carburetors become gummed up. The pilot jets become plugged solid. Then the needles and seats get fouled up and it's all downhill from there. It's highly recommended to get new parts like float bowl gaskets and needles and seats if either the bowl gaskets are flattened or the needles are stuck in their seats. Sometimes everything can be cleaned up without buying parts, but that almost always requires an ultrasonic cleaner to get good results. Before I can even get to the carburetors, the seats and the fuel tank must be removed. It's easy enough to do on these bikes. On this bike, it was 2 6mm Allen keys to remove the seat and a 12mm socket to remove the tank, after removing the fuel tank, of course. You can see me doing that here. I'll zoom in here in a sec so you can get a better idea of how the carburetors are removed from the right side of the bike. Here I've already removed the entire right side of the airbox, and I'm going after the air filter / airbox hoses that come directly out of the carburetors. This is just 2 hose clamps, and then you have to work the piping all the way through the side of the bike. I've found it's easiest to remove it from the right side. That's the side that makes the most sense. The carburetors on these bikes look intimidating, but it's really not that difficult as long as you go slow and pay attention to what you're doing. The airbox is the first carburetor-related part to be removed from the bike after the tank and seat have been removed. It's 2 10mm fasteners and 3 hose clamps. The airbox comes off in 2 pieces on these bikes. Be careful not to let the triangular piece of rubber fall out of its plastic housing on the first piece of the airbox. If it falls out due to age or corrosion, do your best to put it back where it was before you reinstall it after cleaning your carburetors. Once you've removed the airbox, it's time to go after the breather hoses, fuel line, throttle cables, and the hose clamps holding the carburetors onto their manifolds. Bend everything out of the way as necessary as you remove the various parts. It's all about making room for the carburetors to slide out from one side or the other. On this bike, it was easiest to remove everything and then pop the carburetors out from the right. Note that it requires considerable force to pop the carburetors loose from their manifolds. Make sure your hose clamps are all the way loosened up before you attempt to remove them. You can see me rock them back and forth to get them removed. Honda made an interesting design for the choke on these bikes. The choke knob itself is bolted to the number 2 or rear cylinder. You'll need I think it's a 6 or 5mm Allen key to remove this. And then the throttle cables kind of wrap around the 2 carburetors, or at least the number 1 carburetor, the left carburetor, that's what we're going to refer to it as. That cable wraps around and then goes into a splitter, and then the number 2 cable kind of wraps around the other way and goes into the splitter, and then the splitter mounts over the number 1 carburetor's top hat, if you will. If you're the sort of person who needs to take pictures of things before you take them apart, go ahead and take as many pictures as it takes to make sure that you put the choke cables back together the way that they need to be. What follows is the process of cleaning these carburetors in a blue bin on the ground using some carburetor cleaner and copper wire and 2-stroke oil. The bike had not been sitting for very long. It ran fine on its choke. Its gas looked a little bit discolored. I ended up replacing the fuel just to be safe and make sure that this cleaning will last a little while longer than if we left bad fuel in it. I found that bad fuel, or old fuel, not bad fuel, just older fuel that's been discolored, tends to foul up carburetors a little bit faster than brand new fuel. So that's some food for thought right there. All I'm doing, I've removed the pilot jets at this point, and then I've sprayed some carburetor cleaner in its top cap, the outer rim there that doesn't have a hole in it, and then I throw the pilot jets in there to soak while I work on the main jets. I'm going to work on the main jets individually because they are 2 different sizes on these bikes. The front cylinder has either a higher or lower number on the jet. It gets less fuel because it's exposed to the air, and fuel is actually used as a coolant in carbureted motors and fuel injected motors. Every motor that uses any kind of fuel uses it as a type of coolant. Without extra unburnt fuel, the cylinder head temperatures will get too hot and you will smoke your motor. So I'm just spraying out the main jets now, making sure that they're good and clean. If they had any discoloration to them, I would hit them with a toothbrush and some carburetor cleaner. If they were really discolored, I would use brake cleaner first and then use some carburetor cleaner. Ultimately, if they're really, really bad, I have to use an ultrasonic cleaner in order to clean all of these parts and get them to where they will function properly on the motorcycle again. The carburetor cleaner is used for cleaning off lightly discolored parts. The copper wire is for cleaning out the insides of the pilot jets, and the two-stroke oil is for reconditioning whatever rubber parts I encounter while I'm cleaning the carburetors. In this case, I needed to clean out the float bowl gaskets, or not clean them out, just rub them with some two-stroke oil to bring them back to life, to keep them from drying out too much. Be careful with carburetor cleaner near float bowl gaskets and other rubber parts. It can deform them temporarily, and you might have to wait for them to retake their shape. I'm not sure if it does any permanent damage to them. I kind of doubt it. If you have trouble fitting the float bowl gaskets into the float bowls, you might need to use a little bit of grease to get them situated in there, and get them to stick hard enough for you to get the float bowls back onto the carburetors. And yeah, if your carburetors aren't too far gone, you can do it pretty easily. You can clean them pretty easily, just on the ground or on the bench, wherever. All you might need to do is clean out your pilot jets if your bike has only been sitting for like one winter. Or if the fuel is built up just a teeny tiny bit too much to where it won't flow through the pilot jets, then you need to remove your carburetors, take the float bowls off, remove the pilot jets, clean them out, and then reinstall them inside the carburetors. And sorry for the dead space on the video. I forgot to cut that part out. I'm probably walking to my van doing something. I know staring at an empty blue bin, or a blue bin with a carburetor in it and some tools, is probably like watching paint dry. I'm very sorry for that. I'm not the greatest at editing video. With that, we're going to change views here in a sec, and we're going to watch me reinstall this set of carburetors back on the bike. Don't worry, I'm not going to cheat you out of watching how these carburetors go in. You'll get to see the empty hole that they go into here in a moment or two after I remove them again. They're just kind of lightly sitting almost where they need to be, but not quite. So I'm going to go ahead and pop them out all the way so that you can see the empty hole that they go into. So we'll just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle is something I say about tightly fitting parts. Sometimes that's just what you have to do, is wiggle them until they end up where they need to be. In this case, we're going to pop the carburetors out, let you see the empty hole that they go into. There's the empty hole. Please note that this part of the video is not sped up at all. This is in real time, going 100% speed. The previous parts of the video were sped up at least 2.5x. So just note that. I don't actually work that fast. I don't move that fast, but this part of the video that you're watching, I do move this fast. This is exactly how quickly I get these carburetors back in. It only takes a couple of moments. One of my big concerns here is that the fuel line has to fit between the two float bowls, and it has to go over the front or number 1 intake manifold. That's the one on the right. That's the front one. You have to slip the fuel line past that in order to get the carburetors about where they need to be. Now, once you have the carburetors situated, you have to make sure that the choke splitter, because this thing has 3 choke cables. It has 2 cables that come out of the chokes on either side of the carburetors, and then it has 1 cable that goes down to the knob. You have to make sure that the splitter is situated right in front of the left side carburetor's top cap. So that's the rear or number 2 carburetor's top cap. It's very easy to get confused between the number 1 and 2 carburetors on this V-twin, because your number 1 cylinder is going to be the front, so your number 1 carburetor is going to be on the right. The number 2 carburetor is on the left and goes into the rear cylinder. However, we might call the left carburetor the number 1 carburetor if we're reading left to right. So just note that it's kind of opposite city here. That's something that you can get confused by if you're reading a manual, so don't read too much into manuals. You can see I'm working on the choke splitter right here, trying to get it situated where it needs to be. In the process of getting the carburetors about where they needed to be, the choke splitter ended up wedged between like the frame rail and the top cap of the carburetor. In this case, it might have been easier to go ahead and push the carburetors down into the intake manifolds and give myself an extra like centimeter of room in order to work with the choke splitter, but I opted to just push the choke splitter over to where it needed to be.
You can see me manipulating it with my left hand there, and then once I remove my hand, you'll see where it finally landed. I turned the sound up right there so that you could hear the left or number 2 or rear carburetor pop into its intake manifold. That was my final big push. And then it appears as though I actually fitted the number 1 carburetor, the front carburetor, into its intake manifold first, which is opposite of how I usually do it, but that's just trivia. Here you can see me messing with the carb heaters, the lines for the carb heaters. I'm just inspecting these wires and making sure that they're not too chafed to be used. They're perfectly fine, so I'm going to go ahead and feed them back into where they go. Please excuse the cars driving by. I'm doing this in front of my customer's garage, and he lives on a fairly busy street up in the mountains, so just bear with me on the noise. It is what it is. I can't change it. But here you can see me, I'm messing with the choke knob because that needs to be fitted where it needs to go on the rear cylinder. I'm doing that as I'm feeding these carb heater lines or wires back between the cylinders where they need to go. So yeah, the next step is going to be we're going to hook this bike up to a test bottle and see how well it fires up once we get the Airbox equipment refitted to the motorcycle. I am fitting the choke knob back onto the rear cylinder here. I'm also fitting the carb heater wires back where they go, and then you're going to get to watch me fit the throttle cables back onto this bike. So I didn't bother removing the throttle cables from the bracket. I removed the bracket from the carburetors. That makes it a lot easier to remove the carburetors. It makes it a lot easier to refit the throttle cable. It makes it easier to remove the throttle cable. Everything about this is easier if we just remove the whole entire bracket. The whole bracket, you can see the wires, not wires, but cables for the throttle cables, those are bent around the number 1 cylinder right now. I would throw an arrow up or zoom in, but I don't think it's that important. You can see me manipulating this 5mm screw, getting it tight into the rear cylinder for the choke knob. And then of course I have the splitter for the choke and all of its cables running the way that they need to be run from the factory so that they work properly. Of course I'll test it once I have it fitted. I just switched sides to make it easier for you to watch me fit these throttle cables back onto the carburetors. You can see the throttle cables are still attached to their bracket. That just makes it's 3 screws to remove, actually 4 or 5 screws to remove the entire bracket, but the bracket itself has like a sub bracket that has this little decorative piece of plastic chrome fitted to it using a number 3 Phillips fastener. It's all pretty silly, but it's a hell of a lot easier to just remove this entire bracket than it is to try and remove the throttle cables from the bracket and then have the bracket come out with the carburetors. I'd rather have the carburetors be as small, as compact a package as possible when coming in and out of the motorcycle. So that's part of the reason why I removed the entire bracket. It makes the entire process a hell of a lot easier. So at this point, I have the throttle cables fitted about where they need to be, and now we need to get the fasteners to fit this bracket back onto the carburetors. Here goes the little sub bracket that has the decorative piece of chrome on it. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these 2 screws. They're the 2 screws that have lock washers on them. And then we'll get our little piece of decorative chrome out here in a second or two and pop that back on. The next piece of the puzzle is to get the first part of the airbox with the piping, the part of the airbox that actually attaches to the carburetors. For the number 2 or left side carburetor, you're going to have to fit the piping. It's a tight fit, so just be patient. Lube it up if you want. You can spray all of these parts down with silicone lube. In fact, that's what I did with the intake manifolds before I popped the carburetors in. See, the longer you listen, the more helpful hints you get. So anyway, just bear with me. This is only my 30th time doing one of these stupid voiceover videos. So anyway, I have part of the airbox fitted. I'm on the other side of the bike right now. Sorry if this part of the video is like watching paint dry, just like part of the carburetor cleaning segment before. I apologize for that. There's only so much that I can do to film and actually repair bikes at the same time. I run a mobile repair service out of Colorado Springs, Colorado that serves the Denver, Colorado Springs, Castle Rock, Fort Collins, Pueblo. I've been as far as Pueblo and Fort Collins to fix motorcycles, even though I'm based somewhat out of the Springs. And then I go to Denver every day to work on bikes. I even go as far as Golden. So this customer was actually outside of Golden to the northwest, kind of up in the mountains. And it was a long drive, but I charged a pretty good service call and he didn't mind paying it. So that's a little bit about what I do. I think it's pretty interesting. We're gonna go ahead and switch views to the left side of the bike. Here I have a test bottle. I'm gonna go ahead and hook the test bottle up and see if we can't get this bike started after working on it and cleaning its carburetors. So it's one thing to get a bike running on the bench or just sitting here on a test bottle. It's another thing to get a bike running to where it can go down the road, and it's another thing to get a bike running down the road to where it can go for 1,000 miles, or however many miles you want to ride it at a time. So I've just fired the bike up on the test bottle. I'm inspecting everything. I've turned the sound down on the motorcycle so it's not as loud, so I don't have to scream over it. You can hear me gently revving it. Right now I have it hooked up to a test bottle, which means its fuel line is going into that bottle that you see hanging off of the IV stand. Yes, that is an actual authentic hospital grade IV stand ordered from Amazon.com. Haha. But it holds the test bottle really well. It's a hell of a lot better than trying to hang it off the handlebars or something stupid like that. And at this point in time, I'm just listening to the bike run. I am taking its heartbeat, if you will. I'm the doctor, and I want to hear how it's running. So I'm not messing with it. I'm not shutting it off. I'm letting it warm up as much as I can. I'm exercising as much patience as I can, just listening to it run. And then I'm trying to rev it. You can see me revving it. It seems to be revving exactly how it should. So I'm a little bit, in fact, I'm a lot suspicious of the fuel that's in the tank, which is discolored. It has a greenish hue to it, which means it has to come out. I will burn it up in my van. So the next step of this whole carburetor cleaning process, this whole refurbishing this bike, trying to get it ready to actually ride for somebody who wants to ride it, is to attach the fuel tank and then drain all of the fuel out of the fuel tank, which I'll speed that up so that it's not like watching paint dry, but you'll get to watch the container fill up. We're going to drain every bit of gasoline out of this bike. It was actually somewhat of a challenge because I only had about 2 liters of fuel in one fuel bottle, so I had to take that 2 liters and then put that in the test bottle, and then I drained all of the old fuel into my gas can that was storing fresh fuel that's now stored in the test bottle. So this is one of those like word problems that you had to solve when you were a kid, and you were like, when am I ever going to apply that in real life? And it's applicable to real life like all the time. This is the part where we drain all of the old fuel out of the tank and replace it with what I put in the test bottle. So the test bottle only holds about 2 liters of fuel. This fuel tank holds about 4 gallons of fuel, and it's almost full. So I think we're going to get it about 3 gallons out of it, something like that. Once all of the fuel is out of the fuel tank, the old fuel, I will go ahead and put that old fuel in my van and burn it up. Of course, I'll put some fresh fuel on top of it once I get to a gas station, and then I'll take my test bottle and I will drain that into the fuel tank of the motorcycle. Because I'm leaving the bike with so little fuel, only 2 liters, the owner of this motorcycle will have to run it on the reserve until they get to the nearest gas station. I've already alerted them to this fact, so they shouldn't have any troubles. This is the part where I smoke, where I vape. Actually, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, at least I try not to as much as possible. But I'm just vaping, thinking about life. I'm going to go ahead and sit on my stool. That's a custom-made stool by my friend Matt, who works at a technical college as a welding instructor. He made that for me. It's awesome. I use it every day. I wish we could find a way to sell them. That would be really cool, but it's just one of those homemade, folksy projects that I think is really rad, but other people aren't so sure about. Anyway, while we're waiting, I decided it would be a good idea to air this thing's tires up, because God only knows when the last time it was ridden. So I'm getting my air compressor out, continuing to vape a little bit. Sorry this is like watching paint dry, but if you watch really closely, you can see that fuel bottle filling up with fuel coming out of the fuel tank. So I've fitted a piece of fuel line that I had laying around in my van to the fuel tank, and then because this is not a vacuum actuated petcock, that's actually really awesome, so we don't have to run the bike while we're draining the fuel tank like I do on a lot of scooters. So it's really nice. You can see there's a whole lot of fuel coming out of this fuel tank, but in the meantime my air compressor's ready, so I'm just checking the front tire pressure. Front tire pressure was low, so I'm airing it up. I'm going to air it up to about 35 pounds. 35 foot-pounds of air pressure should be just fine for the front. Same thing on the rear. I don't really care what the manufacturer recommends. That's a pretty good pressure for the street. It'll keep the rims off of the asphalt. It'll keep air in the tires. It'll be good to go. So I'm checking the rear. I did not get to test ride this bike very much at all, but I did load test it. Tested it under load, revved it up really good in this driveway, ran it right up to about the snow berm. I could have jumped over that snow berm and ended up in the street, but I didn't want to risk it. I didn't want to chance it. So we're going to leave it up to this customer to test ride the bike once all of this snow is melted. Yes, that's what that white stuff is in front of the rear tire, and not the rear tire, the front tire. Right on top of the front fender, you can see all of that white. That is snow. So there was actually like a snow kind of berm separating this driveway from the street. I didn't want to ride over it on this motorcycle. I did not want to risk it, so I did not get to test ride it as much as I would have liked. In the past, I've test ridden this bike down the corner or down the mountain, and then parked in kind of a parking area and then ridden it back up, and it's always ridden and run exactly like it should, so I'm not too worried about it. There's another bike in the background. I'm just firing that up because I need to do an oil change on it after I get done with this bike. At this point, I'm just letting it run, or I'm letting the test bottle empty itself out into the fuel tank. I'm getting ready to restart this bike, take it off of the stand or jack, and then try to test ride it a little bit as much as I can in this driveway to make sure that it's going to run well under load at all RPMs. So there, I just fired it up. Looking at it, listening to it, mostly listening to it at this point. It pays to be patient when you're working on motorcycles, whether that's waiting for parts, whether that's going wiggle, wiggle, wiggle to get a part to fit where it needs to go. It pays to be patient with all of this. This bike revs up. So the other cool thing is now I have it running on its own fuel in its own fuel tank hooked up to its own fuel line. So I'm going to go over and rev the other bike a little bit and help it get warmed up for its oil change here in a minute or two. By the way, I'm doing a video on the oil change on the other bike. The other bike is a 2009 or 2008, something like that. Honda Shadow Ace, I think. It's the Ace model. Honda built a whole bunch of variations of these VT750s. So if this bike isn't exactly like yours, I'm very sorry. Go find another video to watch. But if it is, then I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm just fitting the seat back onto the bike right now. It's two 6mm Allen keys with a strap, and it fits into a slot on the front and the back. In this case, the back slot is pretty much impossible to get fitted, so we didn't bother messing with it. We're just fitting the Allen keys, or the Allen bolts, back into where they need to be so that I can test ride this bike once I have the seat fitted. The next step is to remove the jack from the bottom of the bike, so I'm going to go ahead and unscrew that. I'm holding the front brake and the right handlebar. As I do that, I'm going to lean it on its kickstand. Now we're going to go ahead and take it for a little super micro test ride just to the end of the driveway, and then I'm going to back it back up, and then I'm going to go and fiddle fart around in my van a little bit. And then we're going to hop back on the bike and do another little test run, make sure that it runs well under load with the choke out, and then we're going to end up calling this bike good. But in the meantime, I still need to test ride it a little bit. I wish I could test ride it more, but like I said, there's quite a bit of snow on the ground. There's like a snow berm. I could have ridden through it. I'm sure I could have. But I didn't want to chance it. For some reason, I'm getting older, and things are starting to scare me. Things that I used to do before without hesitation, they now give me pause. I have to think twice about them. Call that age, call that maturity, call that something. I think it's a good thing. It's keeping me safe. It's keeping me from getting hurt. God knows I don't need to get hurt doing this. But anyway, I'm listening to the bike again. Just feeling it out, making sure that it's going to run the way that it should for the customer. Yeah, I always worry. I always worry about these things because it could run perfectly well for me and then spring a leak like a day later. You never know. So at this point, I've got out my safety wire. I'm going to go ahead and throw some safety wire around the fuel line. It doesn't really need it, but the circlip is missing. So we're just going to go ahead and tighten that up, make sure it's good to go. Again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you feel like it. If not, I don't really care. I do this for fun because it is fun. Anyway, have a good one, y'all. Hope you enjoyed this video.